Alright, so a couple of days ago we had a pretty horrific mass shooting that took place at an LGBTQ bar in Colorado Springs called Club Q, where essentially some deranged motherfucker decided to go in and attack these people as they were hosting a drag event. And so we're going to get into just some of the basic details in terms of what actually happened with this shooting, and then I'm going to show you this amazing clip from CNN where they actually did an interview with one of the survivors, this guy here who basically almost single-handedly prevented a significantly higher amount of people from dying with the actions that he took in confronting the shooter. And then we're going to get into a lot of these absolutely deranged conservative responses to this shooting, as well as sort of provide background context for this ongoing rhetorical and in many cases violent attacks against the LGBTQ community and some of the legislation as well that has been passed around the country. So here just to start us off from Axios, they got a breakdown in terms of what we know about the Club Q shooting so far. So they say police have named a suspect in the Saturday night shooting at an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs that killed 5 people. They say police said on Monday that 18 people were injured during the shooting, 17 of whom suffered gunshot wounds, and the suspect in the deadly shooting is facing multiple murder and hate crime charges, according to Max D'Onofrio, a city spokesperson. He said, quote, "We know many more community members were present at the Club Q shooting during at the club during the shooting, and who may be victims with no visible injuries." They also say that police and city officials initially said Sunday that 25 people had been wounded, and they say law enforcement said that the shooter used an, of course, AR-15 style assault rifle in the club, which is something that we see as a basic through line in most of these mass shootings, the ease of access, the proliferation of firearms within the United States. We literally have more guns than people in this country, and it is just always going to lead to this as an inevitable, outcome in that type of an environment. So they continue saying that Colorado Springs Mayor John Suthers told the Washington Post on Monday that the suspect's actions appear to have been the trappings of a hate crime, but underscored that the motive remains unknown. They say authorities said 2 patrons tackled the shooter, including U.S. Army veteran Richard Fierro, who is this guy we're about to watch in a second, who hit the suspect with his own handgun. And reading a little bit more into the details when I was researching for this video, basically, I mean, this guy, this Army veteran here, Richard Fierro, literally almost killed the shooter. I mean, he beat him into oblivion, and again, probably saved countless lives in the process of doing things. They say that Suthers told the AP that the situation could have been exponentially more tragic if Fierro hadn't done that. And they finish here saying that police identified the alleged shooter as Anderson Aldrich, 22 years old, and they were also wounded during the shooting, obviously, again, by this guy, this Army veteran who stepped up. And they say that the shooter was released from a local hospital on Tuesday when public defendants said in a court filing that the accused is non-binary and uses they-them pronouns. Okay, so this is a big, kind of important new development that the right has been latching onto to a significant degree, right? If this guy is coming out and saying that he is non-binary, he is a member of the LGBTQ community, then that would sort of lend some sort of credence to the idea or the narrative that maybe this wasn't a directed hate crime at the LGBTQ community. Maybe this was something personal. Maybe he had beef with somebody who was in that location. But, obviously you can't definitively say one way or another whether or not he is telling the truth about this. But based on what we know so far, I mean, I can get into just some of what we saw from this Daily Beast article that just dropped a couple of days ago on this. I mean, based on what we know so far, based on like some of his social media history, based on what some of his family and friends, and in this case a neighbor, have said about him, it doesn't seem like this guy has had a consistent track record of actually being non-binary, and it definitely seems more likely that he is vehemently and obviously violently homophobic, and basically this could be an attempt by his defense team to try to get out of some of those hate crime charges that are being brought against him, obviously. So again, there's no way to say definitively, but I have my doubts when it comes to this claim here. It sees like that could again just be a defense mechanism for the case that's being brought against him. But now they give a little bit more context, which just makes the story this much weirder and disappointing in the fact that this could have been something that maybe could have been prevented. So they say in June of last year, Aldrich had another run-in-law with law enforcement after they allegedly threatened his mother with a homemade bomb, weapons, and ammunition. Okay, so you threatened your mother with a homemade bomb, weapons, and ammunition, right? So again, keep in mind, as they point out down here, Colorado has a red flag law in place, basically, right? Where it's like, if you are somebody who is making these types of threats, if you are, you know, threatening with a homemade bomb and weapons and other ammunition, then people should raise that red flag, and then the government or law enforcement should step in and make sure that you are not able to get your hands on weapons to potentially actually act on those threats in the future, right? So it seems like this is something where they had him on their radar and nobody decided to do anything to prevent this, right? So they say, however, no records indicate that prosecutors moved forward with charges against Aldrich at the time, and neither police nor relatives tried to trigger Colorado's red flag law, which would have enabled his weapons and ammunition to be seized. So again, just another institutional law enforcement failure here, where they could have potentially done something about this and nobody stepped up to the plate to actually do it. So that's just basically the rundown of what we know so far. And now I want to get into this clip here from, again, that guy Fierro, who was the guy who basically was, I guess, the hero in this situation, if there, you know, ever could be in this type of a absolutely brutal and horrific situation. But let's just go ahead and watch this. It gets pretty intense, so heads up on that.
It may not even been a window left, but I saw a lot of people, and this guy was there, and I saw the ACU pattern flag vest. And for me, that was like, there's a handle, I'm getting it. So I ran across the room, grabbed the handle, pulled him down, and then started to, well, actually, I think I went for his gun with him. His rifle flew in front of him, and the young man that tried to jump in there with me, we both either pulled him down or whatever, but he ended up at his head, and right next to the AR. And then with the AR, I told him, push the AR, get the AR away from him. The kid pushed the AR. I don't know what his name was. And then I proceeded to take his other weapon, the pistol, and then just start hitting him where I could, but the armor's in the way. And I found a crease in between his armor and his head, and I just started wailing away with his gun. And then I told the kid in front of me, kick him, keep kicking him. And I was guiding him. I was telling people, call 911, call 911. I brought him down. I was in mode. I was doing what I do downrange, you know. I trained for this. I don't want to ever do this. I didn't even retire because I was done doing this stuff. It was too much. And I'm you know, it came in handy, and I got to protect my kid. I lost my kid's boyfriend. I tried to have everybody in there. I still feel bad that there's 5 people there's 5 people that didn't come home. And this guy, I told him while I was hitting him, I said, I'm gonna kill you, man, because you tried to kill my friends. My family was in there. My little girl was in there with her.
We are so...
Okay, so, I mean, yeah, obviously, again, I warned you guys that was going to be pretty intense, but, I mean, again, credit to this guy. If he wasn't there, if he didn't step up to the plate, a lot of more people could have died. So, I mean, it takes a lot. Obviously, this is going to be traumatic, not just for him and his family. They lost the sister's boyfriend in this shooting. He was one of the ones who died, but, I mean, all of them, I'm pretty sure even his daughter and his wife, who I think was with him, I'm pretty sure they also got injured in this as well. So, I mean, all of these people are going to be dealing with physical injuries, obviously, you know, PTSD and trauma going forward. So, I mean, it's just an absolutely horrific situation. And again, this guy's pretty much a hero in that, if there could be one. But now I want to get into some of the conservative responses to this, because again, you know, obviously we don't 100% know what the actual underlying motivations are, if this guy actually is a member of the LGBTQ community. But, you know, I've given you guys a context on that. Even with that, let's just go ahead and look at some of the responses from the right on this current situation, because these have been somehow even more insane than they usually are when it comes to covering things regarding the LGBTQ community, or more specifically trans people, and this grooming narrative that they have been running with aggressively over the last couple of years. So here we had the initial tweet from Tim Pool, a right-wing commentator, although he will try to denounce the fact that he is obviously right-wing, but he said, "We shouldn't tolerate pedophiles grooming kids. Club Q had a grooming event. How do we prevent the violence and stop the grooming?" Okay, so this is how he's reacting to this, right? Not just a full-throated condemnation of the guy who did the shooting. He's saying, no, I guess more of a primary problem here is that this type of a drag show was happening in the first place. How does that make any fucking sense? I mean, this is absolutely insane, right? We shouldn't tolerate pedophiles grooming the kids. Who's the pedophile in this situation? Just what, any random LGBTQ person, any random drag dancer who was putting on a show there? I mean, how does that make any sense that they are inherently pedophiles, right? You're just attaching this label to them without demonstrating in any way, shape, or form what that actually means. They're just attaching this label to the entire community, to anybody who does a drag event, anybody, you know, who happens to be trans or a member of the LGBT community. That's how they talk about this, right? Now they'll turn around and they'll deny that, and they'll say, no, we're not painting with a broad brush. We're just saying, you know, specifically relating to the kids. But that is how their rhetoric is spread. That is how their rhetoric is overwhelmingly demonstrated across the board, right? So, I mean, he's basically just insinuating here, you know, this is an equivalent problem in terms of shutting down drag events and shutting down mass shootings. Those are two things that are sort of like on the same level in terms of a threat to our, you know, public safety or whatever. And we had a response here from Steven Crowder. He said, strong legislation to protect children, and an armed populace to protect themselves and their kin. You know, I think maybe if you wanted to actually protect children, you know what you could do is maybe try to prevent the endless proliferation, the infinite proliferation of guns and the accessibility of guns in this country that are relentlessly being used in all of these mass shootings. I mean, specifically a lot of these, you know, AR-15s, which are typically the gun of choice for a lot of these mass shooters in these situations, right? I mean, if you want to actually protect children, there's plenty of things that you could do. Step one would not be shutting down drag events or trying to like criminalize the existence of trans people or trans youth. I mean, that's how they legitimately try to interpret this stuff, right? He says strong legislation to protect children and an armed populace to protect themselves. Protect yourselves from what? Okay, believe it or not, Steven Crowder, no drag dancer is like busting down your door to try to go and perform in front of you. Okay, that's not happening. So when he says to protect themselves and their kin, okay, this guy, the guy who we just listened to give this emotional speech here, he was there with his family, right? He chose to go be there because I'm pretty sure it was his daughter who had a friend that was performing in this drag show, and he chose to go be there with his family. This was 100% consensual. Nobody is forcing them to go to these events, right? To protect themselves and their kin. The shooter had no affiliation with these people. He wasn't a family member of the people that he just shot. He wasn't protecting anybody. I mean, this is completely fucking deranged, but this is their response to this, right? I mean, it gets worse. Of course, we had Libs of TikTok getting in here with a little bit of, you know, continued stochastic terrorism in this instance. So, I mean, this was posted just right after this shooting happened, right? She posts, this organization in Colorado teaches kids how to become drag queens and helps kids safely experience the art of drag on stage. Colorado state reps, blah, 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 promoted and encouraged this child drag organization and performance. Okay, think about this for a second, okay? The same people who do these events for these young girls and these pageant shows on a regular basis and think that that is completely normal, they're turning around and saying that this is somehow real grooming, right? But the pageant shows, those are not real grooming, even though, you know, it's even more aggressive in terms of the way that some of these young girls present themselves in those shows versus what? I mean, kids just like dressing up in fun little outfits. What the fuck is your problem with that? I mean, legitimately, you look at this picture, you think that this is grooming? You think that this is sexualization? I mean, I would like to get into the minds of some of these conservatives who think that this is inherently sexual in some way, because clearly, you know, there might be a little bit of a feedback loop in your own mind where maybe you think that this is sexual, you're interpreting this as sexual because you're fucked up or perverted or something. But I mean, it's just kids dressing up and having fun. There's nothing inherently sexual about this, but this is how, you know, they use this rhetoric, saying that, like, you know, pushing the narrative that like this is somehow grooming, this is somehow pedophilia, this is somehow an organized campaign to try to propagandize the young people. Okay, I mean, this is the type of rhetoric that they have been using in response to this. We also had a recent clip of Matt Walsh, this theocratic fascist, who recently went on Joe Rogan's podcast, of course, and this really just demonstrated to me how stupid a lot of these super anti-trans commentators are, especially a guy like Matt Walsh, who, I mean, literally created an entire documentary called What is a Woman, which was basically just his anti-trans, you know, propaganda piece, I guess, and he has basically touted himself as like one of the foremost experts on the whole trans situation and trans children in this country, and he doesn't even know the basic statistics of how many people, how many kids are engaging in different forms of social transitioning or gender confirmation surgeries or, you know, hormone therapies or anything like that. He does not even know the basics, even after years of doing supposed research for this massive documentary that he was pretending to be an expert on this issue on. So let's just go ahead and watch this little clip here from Joe Rogan where he absolutely embarrasses himself and this entire anti-trans movement.
How many people have had this done? Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but if we're talking about the drugs, I mean, millions.
You're talking about hormone blockers.
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers, really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah, that would be my guess. I can say for double mastectomies, I read a report recently that there were over 1,000 done between 2016 and 2019, and when you compare that to how many were done between 2008 and 2015, it's a massive increase. And over 1,000 girls had gender-affirming double mastectomies in that time frame.
And when you say girls, you're talking about prepubescent,
right? Minors, and that's just up until 2019. And then we know that there's been this exponential increase with all this stuff year over year. So it's a lot. It's too many. Having this happen to one kid is way too many. It's a lot more than one.
Yeah, look, if you're an adult and you want to do that and you understand who you are and what you are and this is how you feel you should progress, you're an adult. This is a free country. You should be able to do whatever you want. But when you're talking about doing that to children, the fact that so many people are on board and so many people are angry, if you have, people are going to be angry at us that we're having these conversations.
Yeah, they will be. And I also... I actually think that that this shouldn't be happening to.
It's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
It says it's kind of undercounted, but that's
okay. So, I mean, again, confidently coming out there and saying, oh, it's in the millions. It's in the millions, right? And the actual number, as they point out down here, with Jamie coming in hot with the fast check, or with the fact check here, they say over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,700 adolescents who started on puberty blockers. Okay, so millions versus maybe around 1,000 or less per year. Okay, that's the gulf between what Matt Walsh pretends to, know and be an expert on versus what he actually knows. I mean, this is just a perfect, a perfect example in terms of how much they overhype this entire issue, as if it is this massive, exponentially reaching, societal phenomenon where half the kids today are just becoming trans on a whim. Okay, that's how they portray this, and you can see here he's just dramatically overhyping it. This is a guy who made an entire fucking documentary about this issue, and he overestimated it by a factor of 1,000. I mean, this is just completely fucking ridiculous, right? I mean, this guy is supposed to be an expert on this topic, doesn't know even just the most foundational, foundational reality in terms of how much of this is actually happening. I mean, that would be step one in doing research for some type of project like that. But again, they don't want to do real research because they don't want real answers on this issue, right? They don't want, to actually get into the data and understand that an overwhelming majority of children who engage in social transitioning from a young age end up sticking with that and end up going through later in life with gender affirming surgeries and things like that. I mean, they don't want to get into the statistics on trans suicide rates, especially among trans youth, where if you are not accepted by your family, if you are not accepted by your friends and your broader community, then you are at a dramatically increased likelihood to commit suicide. But at the end of the day, I mean, it sounds fucked up to say it, but it's also true. That's pretty much what they want. They don't want to protect children. They want trans people and gay people as an extension of that to simply not exist. Okay, that is what this is. And we also had, of course, Tucker Carlson coming in with his typical, transphobic nonsense. So this is pointed out here by Kat. She says, in case you missed it, all of these clips happened in the first 20 minutes of last night's show. She says, this is deranged, dangerous, and completely on purpose. Let's just go ahead and listen to this little montage here from a couple nights ago.
Anderson Lee Aldrich committed mass murder because you complained about the sexualizing of children, sexually mutilating kids, sexually mutilating children, the sexual mutilation of children, the sexuality of children, people mutilating the genitals of children, running ads on Instagram promoting kiddie porn, kiddie porn, kiddie porn, kiddie porn. It's an endorsement of kiddie porn. They are not doing it for a scientifically defensible reason. They're doing it because they believe in a very specific religious ideology. That's true. It's happening. It's absolutely real. You're not imagining that. The evidence is everywhere, and it comes to light on the internet. It is happening. You can't just make up a story because it suits your pre-existing beliefs. Are we jumping?
can't just make up a story because it suits your pre-existing beliefs. Sounds like what Tucker Carlson does on a literal nightly basis. But I mean, this wasn't even the only clip. I don't know if she actually linked it down in this thread here, but there was another clip of Tucker Carlson where he was on with some guest. I think it was actually Christopher Rufo, one of these GOP operatives who's basically been, starting a lot of these trends, whether it's the anti-trans stuff or whether it's the CRT narrative and all of that. And he basically said, like, we need to have an armed populace. We need to fight back against this as if this is some sort of a war. Right? I mean, that's how they portray it. That's the type of rhetoric that they are using. And when you do that over time, you are laying the groundwork for this type of an environment to sprout up, right? It's not a fucking mystery as to why we have seen a dramatic, near exponential increase in attacks against gay and trans people over the last couple of years that I guess just so happens to coincidentally line up perfectly with this increased rhetorical attack against that community as well. I mean, again, this is like a direct through line here between creating this type of a hostile environment within this country, and then having some like subset of the population who are deranged enough to go actually act out on that and commit mass shootings or acts of violence against these people. I mean, an analogy that I would come up here, that I could come up with here before we get into this Ben Shapiro clip. I mean, it's like the Donald Trump situation, right? And how many people went to January 6th because they truly believed that they were fighting for, democracy in this country or fighting to preserve the country, right? I mean, if you lay the groundwork with months and months and months of propaganda, relentless lies, and you're trying to convince people and successfully convincing millions and millions of people across the country that, in the case of Donald Trump, the election is stolen, it's fraud, it's rigged, the radical communists are trying to take over the government, you have to fight back, you have to, be armed, you have to protect this country, right? And be a true patriot, right? If you instill that in people's heads and nail it down for months and months and months on end, inevitably, some subset of the population, they're going to go act on that. Because if you are portraying the situation as if it is existential, then, in the case of the anti-trans stuff, right? If you're portraying this situation as if like there's some sort of a mass genocide of children going on or a mass pedophile ring going on in regards to the LGBTQ community, then some people are going to go out and act on that and feel as though they are justified because of how much you are demonizing the other side of this equation, right? I mean, that is just an inevitability, but still, all of these conservatives want to just completely lay their hands off of this and pretend as if their rhetoric, the environment that they are creating, has absolutely nothing to do with these ongoing escalatory attacks. So I want to play this little Ben Shapiro clip, just the first couple minutes of it, because he basically lays out the argument kind of better than a lot of these other conservatives do, but in a way that is just so easily dismantleable that it's honestly hilarious. So let's just go ahead and listen to Ben Shapiro describe the current situation and how unfairly the left is treating the right after this mass shooting.
Again and again and again, we see in public life, when there is a threat against a person of the right, when there is an attack by a member of a left-wing organization or an intersectional identity associated with the left against someone else, that we don't tie that to a broader ideology. We don't attempt to suggest that it's the fault of everyone who has general beliefs in a broader social system.
Okay, this motherfucker is actually trying to say that the right wing of this country, that conservatives in this country, that he himself do not weaponize some of these narratives in order to cast the entirety of the liberals or the left in this country under that same banner. These are the same people who, for over 2 straight years now, I mean, we're damn near into 2023 at this point, they have taken one of the largest civil rights movements in American history, the BLM protests during the 2020 summer in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor being unjustly murdered by the police. They took that situation and have been relentlessly, for years now, hammering home the narrative that not only was this like a situation where the entire country was on fire and all of these cities got completely burnt to the ground, and that, all of these protesters were radical left Antifa communist terrorists or whatever, not only pushing that narrative, but then also extending that to say that everybody to the left of Hillary Clinton is somehow like a radical defund the police leftist. I mean, I believe in defunding the police, and that's a whole different argument to get into, but Joe Biden, I mean, this is a guy, the Democratic Party, that's an organization that overwhelmingly are aggressively pro-police, right? They want to add more cops to the streets. They want to dramatically ramp up police funding, okay? That's the Democratic Party, but these are the same people, these conservatives, who have been pretending for years now that there's some sort of a massive crime wave that's been going on, and it's the fault of Joe Biden and the radical left Democrats because they, gave in to the demands of the Antifa terrorists and defunded the police, and that the police have no money to work with and no resources to work with. You do this all the time. That is all you guys do, and it's especially ironic because, not only is it bullshit that like, oh, the right wing doesn't cast aspersions on the entirety of the left whenever an individual does something bad, not only is that obvious face value bullshit that he's pushing there, but I mean, even beyond that, we're talking about a situation where in this country, if you look at the actual statistics on this, if you look at the actual data on this, the violence coming from the left or from different minority groups like the LGBTQ community or minorities in this country, the comparison statistically on the amount of attacks that are perpetrated by the left against the right versus by the right against all of these other groups of people, it is not even comparable. We are talking about like only 2% roughly of these attacks, these violent attacks and mass shooting types of situations are coming from people who are explicitly doing it for political reasons from the left wing of the spectrum. It's an overwhelming majority of these are coming from the right wing. They are coming from people who are at least partially ideologically motivated, right? I mean, he's literally trying to sit back here and say, even though I pretty much, agree with what the ideology underpinning a lot of these mass shooters is, right? Whether it's like the Buffalo shooter or whatever who wrote his white supremacist manifesto, even though I am, using dog whistles and pushing the same underlying belief system that he has, I have absolutely no responsibility for the proliferation of these ideas and for, inevitably some deranged people latching onto that and acting out on it in a violent way. I mean, that's what he's trying to say here. It's completely ridiculous, especially, again, given the disproportionate nature of political violence in this country. This is not something where it's 50-50 and sometimes you have a Hillary Clinton supporter or whatever who goes and shoots up some right-wing political event. Or I mean, when was the last time you heard of a gay person going up and shooting a straight bar, or a Jewish person going up and shooting a Catholic church, right? I mean, this type of shit does not happen on a regular basis, but somehow we just seem to have like weekly events where there's some sort of a mass shooting or terror attack or threatened terror attack that's coming explicitly from the right and has those same ideological motivations that you have been. I mean, it's just so dishonest that it's absolutely wild. But let's just go ahead and listen to just a little bit more of this. I know that this video is getting really long at this point.
Instead, we say, well, that's an individual and he believes an extreme thing, and that person ought to be ostracized, obviously. But when it comes to the right, then the idea is that if a person who we don't even know what his views are on any of this stuff yet, even if it turns out this person has a manifesto that is wildly, horrifically anti-gay, for example, does that mean that everybody who believes that same-sex marriage is wrong, a societally approved same-sex marriage is wrong? Does that mean everybody is now guilty for a person who goes and shoots up a nightclub? This sort of game is really ugly. It's really hideous. And again, it is only played by one side of the political aisle. I've been saying for my entire career.
Okay, I'm just going to have to go ahead and cut it off there. I mean, again, he's hammering home the same exact point at the end there, saying this only comes from the left. Completely ridiculous. Look at how conservatives continue to talk about the BLM protests to this day, but also beyond that. I mean, he's saying, we don't have culpability, people who just don't believe in same-sex marriage or whatever. First of all, you're not giving a steel-manned position of the type of rhetoric that you use on a daily basis, similar to a lot of those other right-wing pundits that we just looked through, Tim Pool, Tucker Carlson, Steven Crowder, Matt Walsh, all of those guys, right, including Ben Shapiro himself. They use this rhetoric that portrays this type of a situation as an existential threat, that they're coming for your children, they are going to destroy this country, they are going to commit a widespread trans attack, right? That's how they talk about this. That's the type of rhetoric that they are using in these situations. And then he's trying to turn around and equate that with what, just like an average person who happens to not be in favor of gay marriage or something. Those are not the two same things. I mean, obviously it's not the two same things just purely in rhetoric, but it's also not the two or not the same two things, because you are a political pundit, Ben. You are somebody who talks to millions and millions of people and has an influence in how our society is going to be addressing these issues. And if you are relentlessly pushing these ideas into millions of other people's heads, then yeah, you do have a sort of, culpability in that. You have a responsibility there with your platform to not create a hostile environment where you are just picking different scapegoats and groups of people, whether it's immigrants or black people or the LGBTQ community, right? Picking those scapegoats and then pretending as if those are the people who are to blame with all of the problems within society. If you are helping to create and craft that environment, then yes, of course you have some semblance of responsibility or a role in this equation, right? Now, I'm not saying that like Ben Shapiro personally, is responsible for sending this guy out and he should be criminally charged or something like that. No, but you are building the environment for that type of situation to be significantly more likely. And it's not even just on, the rhetoric rhetoric that they use. It's also on the back end of that. I mean, think about how often conservatives turn around in these types of situations and say, oh, he was just mentally ill, right? This has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with ideology, no matter what the situation is. He was just a mentally ill person. This is a mental health issue, right? I mean, this coming from the same people, right? The GOP just a couple of months ago, at this point, 205 of them in Congress voted against a school safety mental health bill, okay? 205 of them voted against the mental health bill that would have actually gone partially towards addressing the mental health issue that we're talking about, and that you often cite or always cite as if that's the main problem that needs to be addressed right now. You don't even want to address the mental health side of that. You don't want to address the proliferation of guns around this country, where some guy who literally called in a bomb threat a couple years ago can go and get easy access to an AR-15 and go shoot up a nightclub. You're not trying to address this issue from any perspective, okay, in any meaningful capacity whatsoever. Your solution to this is just gay and trans people should go off into some corner of society and just be ostracized. That's your solution. That is the type of country that you are trying to craft with the rhetoric that you use and with the, you know, policy prescriptions and otherwise that you were trying to push for. And so that ties into just the last part of this video, which is the actual legislative side of this, right? I mean, this is from months ago at this point, so it's definitely a higher number than this one here, but this is from March of 2022. They say nearly 240 anti-LGBTQ bills were filed in 2022 so far, most of them targeting trans people. And some of these, I mean, obviously are egregious and, you know, horrific, but some of them are also just like egregiously stupid. Like there was one that was banning trans athletes from participating in sports within the state of Utah for you know, students, not for like older people, but for students, right? Banning them from being able to participate in sports. And then come to find out, they crafted this entire piece of legislation, and there are literally only 4 trans athletes participating in women's sports within the entire fucking state of Utah, okay? There have literally been more bills that have been proposed, anti-trans bills, than there are actual trans athletes within this country, okay? So again, this is just a moral panic. It is a hysteria. It is completely blown out of proportion, and we're just, you know, starting to see the blowback consequences from that. I mean, one more piece of legislation here that was being put forward in Texas. They say, if here from Aaron Reed, she says, and it begins, Texas has filed a bill that would make consenting to gender-affirming care child abuse with prison sentences for parents. And they say that this bill will mean a mass rounding up of trans kids if passed. Okay, so I mean, there you go. This is the current situation of the, you know, rampant abuse of culture war issues and trying to create these scapegoats within society so that, you know, the GOP or conservatives generally don't have to talk about their actual underlying, you know, economic and foreign policy beliefs, which overwhelmingly tend to serve the elites within society. I mean, this is their entire MO. This is their entire agenda. The attacks against gay people, the attacks against black people, the attacks against all of the most marginalized groups within this country, immigrants as well. This is something they have been doing for decades, okay? It goes well beyond even the beginning of my own lifetime. So, I mean, this isn't anything new, but I mean, you could definitely anticipate, although we don't know the specific details of the motivation behind this shooter, I think that we can make some educated guesses, and regardless of whether or not it turns out that maybe he is non-binary or this wasn't a technical hate crime, regardless, this environment that conservatives are continuing to hammer away on, creating this moral panic, creating this hysteria surrounding the LGBTQ community, it is inevitably going to lead to more of these types of attacks happening in the future.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying